Welcome back to part 3, Critical Thinking, Analysis and Materials to Combat Climate Change. We consider the effect of China on the markets, as well as the issue of intermittency, while considering alternative storage, materials, wind, solar, and redox batteries.
If you want to build reliable electricity in China, yes, they can add substantial amounts more wind and solar, and they're doing that. But what they should be doing is building 5 times the number of nuclear reactors that they're building.
Yes.
Then you ask the question, well, why aren't they? Well, because there are very few supplies of uranium in China. And if you haven't noticed, the West is not being particularly polite to China these days. We can argue about whether this is, deserved or undeserved, doesn't really matter. The point is, they're not going to add nuclear reactors that depend on uranium being produced in Canada or in Kazakhstan or somewhere else if they're not certain that they can get it, because they would shut their society down if that uranium can't be obtained. So then the next obvious question is, okay, if we see shutting those carbon-fired or those carbon-emitting coal-fired plants down in China as a valuable thing to do, how can we, as a little country like Canada, do something to help the Chinese feel confident in their uranium supply so that they would build those reactors and shut those coal-fired plants down? China is not against doing this, right? They're on a program to do it now, and they'd love to take those emissions out of the air to give their own citizens a more breathable atmosphere. But it's not a viable option today because they can't be sure they're not going to run out of uranium fuel.
And maybe you can speak to, because I don't like when people get a little disillusioned. They think, okay, this intermittency issue. Oh, then we just forget it then. Is that, there's an intermittency issue, but there's also technology being, and we won't go too in depth into it. I'd love to do a show separately on it. But when you look at a specific metal that you really like, which is vanadium and vanadium redox batteries, there's things being developed and currently used. They're not like dream world stuff that can solve this intermittency issue.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, lithium batteries. Yes, we can use lithium batteries to store electricity. The value of a lithium battery, though, is more in this sort of a device. A cell phone. It's the portability and the energy density that lithium provides. That's where the real value is. Putting 1 million batteries in a building that is admittedly very tough to pick up and move doesn't seem like a great use of lithium. So then you start to think about other technologies that can store electricity. And you come into things like you mentioned, Andrew, the vanadium oxidation reduction batteries, redox cells that are out there. Big tanks of liquid that get pumped through cells that contain the right catalysts and the right elements to effectively take that electricity and turn it back into something that can be utilized to do work. The problem there is how much vanadium is in the world. What's the price of vanadium going to move to as we try to do this? We already have lithium, for example, at near historic highs, about $80,000 a ton of lithium chemical. Prices that we've never seen before, prices that are already impacting the utility and the usability of lithium in things like electric vehicles. So we have to worry about prices of critical materials, but there are even alternatives there. For example, we know that Canadians are pretty good at mining, right? I mean, we've done a fair bit of this. There are companies out there who are taking Canadian mining technology and using it to do things like go onto the site of a disused coal plant somewhere. You've got power lines running in. You've got excess capacity on those lines because the coal plant isn't producing any electricity anymore. And they will use remote mining technology to excavate a cavity underground that they then pump air into during the evening and the night when electricity is cheap. And they allow that air to flood out again through turbines to reconstitute electricity during the day when electricity is required. that sort of compressed air energy storage is proven. It is absolutely in use in the market today. We know its cost and it's tractable. It's much more attractive than using lithium batteries. But the drawback to compressed air energy storage used to be, I need to find a cavity that's already there,
Yes. Yeah.
close to power lines, close to, the demand for it, and on and on and on. And the number of abandoned salt mines that happen to be close to a city near a power line
Yeah.
is not that great.
Yes.
Now, these Canadian companies, with the use of Canadian remote mining technology, are making it possible to dig a cavity underground and put this just about anywhere. And by the way, we're not talking about an enormous cavity. If you're talking about megawatt levels of power, even up to 100 megawatts, and you're talking about hours of duration for this storage system, you're talking about something that has the volume of a decent sized underground parking garage. No more than that.
Now, does this require the salt type cavern? So it is like a specific. No, it doesn't.
It's any competent body of rock that they can access. Whether it's you don't want it to be 3 kilometers underground or anything like that.
Yeah,
but I mean, if it's 200 or 300 meters down, you sink a shaft to it, you dig out the cavity, and you add the additional equipment to basically make this work. And that equipment is understood. It exists. It's used in industry already. It's used in the power grid itself. You're just making an artificial cavity to make it go. Yes, it adds capital cost, but not a huge amount.
How does this differ from, say, a geothermal specifically?
Well, if you're doing geothermal, what you're doing is you're essentially digging a line down to a hot mantle at some point.
Yes.
You're looking for a hot rock.
Yeah.
And hot enough to basically boil water. That's going to be fairly deep. I mean, I at the Sudbury Neutrino Observatory, I was working 6,800 feet underground.
Oh.
The new rock face was warm. It was probably about 38 or 40 degrees Celsius, but it ain't going to boil water. So you're talking about going far, far deeper than that. With these sorts of storage projects, you're not talking about digging down, anything close to a kilometer and a half, 2 kilometers underground. You don't need to. And that obviously limits the cost of doing this for the most part. It makes it tractable.
So that's very interesting, because once again, like when I haven't spent a lot of time with geothermal, but it also just seems like it's another tool that if you have the geology, you have the right system. Yes. If you're Iceland, use it. We can do it.
Please.
But if you try to apply it, say in BC, it's listen, it's not the right fit. We have to find the right fit for the right.
And I'd add, Andrew, it's reliable. That's the other part that's important. Geothermal is baseload.
Yes.
It's reliable enough to be depended on. And by the way, for people who don't understand that terminology in the grid, baseload reliable, quote unquote, electricity doesn't mean it's 100% reliable. Everything breaks. I mean, even the nuclear industry, I don't want to raise the specter of actual reactor failures, because those never really happen.
Yeah.
In any real sense, unless some design flaw has been incorporated, like say building a reactor near an earthquake zone, on a coast.
Yeah.
Not a great idea.
Yeah.
But if you're talking about nuclear, even nuclear energy is about 92-93% reliable. Turbines break, power electronics fails, switches go out. I mean, this happens. So if anything is sort of 80%, 75 to 80% plus reliable, we call it baseload.
Yeah.
Now, if we go and look at wind and solar, for example, in the last year or two, and the U.S. Department of Energy publishes these figures, you can go look up sets of data on things like capacity factors for these different generating assets. And these are not cherry-picked numbers. These are just what occurs in the United States. Wind, if memory serves, is only about 25% reliable, and wind is only about 35% reliable. And the numbers make sense. I mean, the wind doesn't blow all the time, or it blows too fast sometimes. Yeah. And the sun doesn't shine at night, the last time I checked. So, you're starting from a base of about 50% for solar photovoltaic. You don't have a choice. That's not good enough to run, our modern society. We expect the lights to go on when we flip the switch, and we need baseload electricity. That means, in addition to the solar and the wind, which are absolutely going to play roles, we're going to need some baseload. That includes geothermal, that includes hydroelectricity, that includes nuclear.